Bienvenidos to the Bronze Titan on YouTube. I'm your host, Benjamin Ramos. I'm an independent journalist and longtime Cuba Solidarity activist based here in New York City. And once a month, I'll be bringing you a podcast on the international movement to end the U.S. blockade against Cuba. On today's segment, we're going to be talking with Dr. Samira Audrey, the program director of the Elam Medical Scholarship Committee of the Interreligious Foundation for Community Organization / Pastors for Peace. You guys probably know it better as IFCO. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the 25th anniversary of the Elam, talking about what's taking place in Cuba right now, the aftermath of the hurricanes, the earthquakes, and what's been happening on the island. So it's a lot of great content. So welcome to the podcast, Samira.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you tonight.
And it is a pleasure and honor to speak with you, Dr. Samira Audrey. Love it, love it. Thank you for being on. I don't want to assume, Samira, that a lot of our listening audience knows exactly what the Elam is. And by the way, for those of you, Elam is Spanish for La Escuela Latinoamericana de Medicina, the Latin American medical school in English, one of the most prestigious international medical schools in the world, and it boasts having one of the largest international populations of students of any medical school in the world. And Dr. Samira is a graduate from that school. So Samira, tell us a little bit about what is the Elam, especially since we're celebrating its 25th anniversary.
Yes, I would love to. Elam has been a blessing to a lot of us. It is a school that was founded in 1999 by El Comandante en Jefe Fidel Castro Ruz, and it came as a result of the devastation that was caused by Hurricanes Mitch and George in that previous year, where there were a lot of countries in Central America and the Caribbean that were seriously affected. The damages and the loss of life was profound. And while Cuba in that moment responded as it has historically responded in sending medical workers to help in those communities, their presence made them realize that that was a temporary fix for the greater problem that these countries and communities were facing. And as Fidel so eloquently and realistically put it, the hurricane of poverty and the setback of centuries of oppression had devastated those parts of the world much more than these hurricanes and had left these communities to be without proper infrastructure in terms of health care and properly trained professionals that could attend to their communities, respecting their cultures and traditions. So he created the school as a way to train youth from these poor communities so that they would return to their countries and serve permanently as health care workers, as doctors in those regions. And so this school was birthed out of, a disaster. And I think it's ironic, but also hard-hitting that we just returned from the 25th anniversary of the school. And this time it's Cuba that has suffered 2 hurricanes and earthquakes in this time. And so I think the response for us as graduates, knowing the history of the school and that it's graduated over 31,000 medical doctors for the world, not just Latin America or the Caribbean. We span from 5 continents. And it is a powerful testament to the solidarity and the internationalism of our Cuban comrades of that revolution in seeking to have permanent solutions. Although they're not the cause of the problems, they have always sought to create solutions that are long lasting, that would help make this world a better place. And so for those of us who were there for this 25th anniversary, it was hard. It was bittersweet. Now we see Cuba going through an incredibly hard time, and we now feel the need more so than ever to give back and stand with Cuba during these hard times.
Samira, I'm always curious about the human connection. as a graduate of the medical school, what was it like? You're not from Cuba. What was it like to have to go to Cuba and live there for what is it, 6 to 8 years, depending on what you're studying? What is it like to go from wherever you come from, Samira? I don't even know your place of origin. I'm not going to assume you're from the United States, but moving from wherever you came from to go live in Cuba, to live in that environment, to live within the revolution. You weren't visiting like a brigadista or caravanista for 2 or 3 weeks. You were living in Cuba for 6 to 8 years. Tell me, what is that like?
Yeah, it is a transformational experience for any of us who have been there. The medical training is 6 years, but there's an additional year that's given to those of us who don't speak Spanish. So we spend 7 years in the program, learning Spanish and medicine, right? And we come from all over, like you said. I'm originally from Ghana. I was born in Ghana and migrated to the U.S. When I was 9, and my family, being Ghanaian, had a taste of Cuban solidarity before we came to the US. And so that was in the background always. It had an impact on me. And so when I realized that this opportunity was available to study medicine in Cuba, I was 15 and I was ready to go like as soon as possible, if graduating high school and everything. But um, I came out at a time where the political climate was very rough. It was the Bush era when I graduated high school. And at that time, there was a question of a threat that they were posing against those who were medical students traveling back and forth between Cuba and the US. So at that point, IFCO had paused applications, right? And so I had to wait to see what happened. But after deciding to pursue an undergraduate education, as soon as I was done with that, I said, all right, let's get back to what this is. Cuba for me and my family, being Africans, Cuba has been an emblem of profound love and unconditional support. This comes from a history of knowing how Cuba played a role in liberation struggles in different African countries, in not only sending military support, but educators, engineers, all sorts of people to go and help build our countries and help us move forward. And in the case of Ghana in particular, when they had a mini revolution in the 80s, Cuba ended up training at least 1,500 to 2,000 youth that were sent to Cuba to learn different trades and then go back to Ghana to apply their knowledge in different sectors. So some of those people were friends of my parents, right? And they came back with their knowledge. They tried to apply what they could. So there's a long history for me in particular, but for a lot of us who came from different places, we didn't all go into Cuba with the same kind of knowledge or background, right? And it was through those years of being in Cuba and being embraced by the Cuban people, their warmth and their understanding and patience, that we came to know what the revolution is all about. That while we were there, we were treated like one of them. We had all the rights to healthcare, education. We were properly taken care of as foreign students on scholarship there. And the education we received was much more than medicine. Again, Cuba being the country that it is, having had to deal with sanctions for so long, it is an experience that is unique that most people do not have any idea of unless maybe you come from Zimbabwe or some other country that has been under sanctions for some time in history. But Cuba's example is very unique. So we learned that despite, the difficulties and challenges, these are people who are determined to be resilient and adapt to whatever the situation was. So we came away with skills that are applicable to our communities back home, wherever they are, that are severely under-resourced and have been left on the margins to survive, right? I don't know if that fully answers your question. I could go on and on, but for me, going to Cuba was like a dream come true for different reasons, because I think it mattered to me a lot that I didn't want to be a typical Western trained physician. I never wanted that. And so that really shaped why I pursued, this scholarship and this opportunity. For me, it was one way or another, I needed to learn a type of medicine that I could apply to my community, especially back in Ghana and other parts of the world that I knew were third world countries where we need a certain level of cultural relativity and understanding to our people, and a level of respecting dignity while we are trying to maintain and protect people's health, and not in a condescending way, not in a way that is very saturated with only thinking about what we can gain in terms of profit, in the way that we look at the medical industrial complex that is existent here in the US and lots of the world, right? So for a lot of us, Cuba was like a different world because we came and we saw this is a country where you go into the clinic, they don't even ask you like what's your insurance or where do you live and what are you doing here? It's literally show me your ID, let me note it down, and then tell me what's wrong with you so I can figure out why you're here and how we can help you get better. And then they run up all these tests, they do all these things and provide treatment for you. And it's like, okay, so where's the big fat bill at the end? That tampoco, that wasn't there. So it was just like a real culture shock in understanding how that system works and how it's much more than you just showing up to the hospital and saying you're sick. These are people who have a system that is actively aware that, your education is part of why you're healthy. Your food access is part of why you're healthy. Your sense of safety in a community is part of why you're healthy. And all that, all the sectors have to interrelate if they're going to, contribute to this healthy environment. And so to have doctors in every neighborhood, nurses in every neighborhood, that you didn't have to be, cream of the crop elite in order to say, oh, my father or my, cousin is a doctor, is unbelievable. As students, we could go to any tertiary institution, whether it's like an institute of hematology, cardiology, and if we wanted to learn and shadow, you just show up. You show up and you follow whoever's, working at that time. They're not gonna send you away. So that's something that I don't think people fully grasp unless you have lived there and you have been there for an extended period of time. Because even with visiting for a short period of time, you don't quite grasp the whole picture of what Cuba is. And also the fact that Cuba has been heavily hit by the political decisions of other people far away from them. Well, not so far away because it's an island just 90 miles off of Florida.
Exactly, right there, right next to the U.S. The biggest
Right
problem
next
it
to the
has.
U.S. Exactly, and this big neighbor is literally determining the livelihood of Cuba in the world, and that is something that is so frustrating on many levels because of the amount of help and love that Cuba has given to the world in different times, even when they were hard up. And they continue to do that, right? So I don't know, Ben, you want to say?
It's no, thank you. And as someone, I've had the Elam kind of revolve around me in very interesting ways throughout the years that I've known about it. And I say that, the pre-interview folks before, when Samira and I were touching base before we started the podcast, a family member of mine, Dr. Joaquin Morante, was a student over at the Elam. I have had friends from Puerto Rico. They're Boricuas on the island that received their medical training from the Elam. And I always love the fact that some of the folks have always said over there that the Elam teaches you to be a healer, not a doctor. Because our definition of a doctor in the United States is someone that provides medicine for money, while a healer is someone who helps you heal. And the fact that mentality is something that I feel like I hear a lot from folks in the Islam. And also just, 100 years ago, Samira, hundreds of years ago when I was younger and I was thinking, what am I going to do with my life with all this science background? I want to be a journalist, but I have all this. biology, chemistry background in my schooling. I think for 5 minutes I thought about the alam, but the writer in me won out. So this is why I'm interviewing and talking with people from the alam and not Dr. Benjamin Ramos. I'm where I'm supposed to be. I'm squeamish around blood and all and guts and all that good stuff. So you guys, you guys are good with that. But Samira, let's move forward 25 years because you and Gail Walker, the executive director of IFCO Pastors for Peace, just got back from the 25th anniversary. Tell us about the 25th anniversary and tell us what's happening in Cuba right now. Because again, it's been months of hurricanes, and I'm glad you remind me. I'm thinking of only one hurricane, and actually, you're right. It was two hurricanes, earthquakes, the power grid. What is happening right now? When you went to Cuba, what did you see?
Yeah, thank you. So it was, like you said, for the 25th anniversary celebration of the school. Time has flown by so fast, but in these 25 years, as I was saying, there have been thousands of graduates. So this is an important milestone for the school that was initially, thought to not, it wasn't going to survive 5 years, but here we are 25 years later. And for us to get there in this very precarious time, it was something. I think initially when we were just even about to start making plans to leave, we weren't sure if the Congress was going to move forward because of all the difficulties that Cuba is going through with, like you said, the national power grid failing about a couple of months back, and then trying to deal with that in the same time as being hit by two hurricanes, Hurricane Oscar and Rafael, in different parts of the island. Oscar hit the eastern side, and then Rafael hit the western side, and then the earthquakes happening hit the eastern side as well. And so you still had all of these things having happened, and we're just like, is this really going to move forward? But this is the marvel of what Cuba is that Cuba is the sort of place that has people who are determined to move forward with life no matter what is happening, right? There are people who cherish important historic moments. They are very aware of their role in present day in making that history. And so not for 1 second were they going to let go of this idea of celebrating 25 years of Islam and honoring the gift that Fidel gave to the world. Because as we just celebrated a few days ago, it's been 8 years that Fidel passed away. And although he's in the ancestral realm, there has been a collective fight to sustain his vision and to keep the people going. The people are keeping Cuba going. And that's what we realized by going for this 25th anniversary. The school has changed a lot. It's a smaller population, mainly because a lot of the scholarship slots that were given to over 120 countries has been reduced over the years. But again, the school was initially, the plan wasn't for it to perpetuate into eternity. But after seeing there was a great need, Cuba continued to provide scholarships, including to the United States, where as currently we're slotted 10 slots each year for students to go study medicine. But the island is at a point where people are struggling, but are still trying to find ways to live life as normally as possible. Because what is strange for us who live in, other parts of the world is that we come from spaces and communities that are not equipped or prepared to confront mass disasters and on a continuous basis. But Cuba has been going through this sort of thing for a long time. They know, they know how to prepare for disasters better than a lot of countries because of being a Caribbean island that has occupied its time with understanding how to organize and mitigate a lot of disasters. And so they have a system, right, that helps the people cope. But aside from that, in the case of, for example, earthquakes, you don't necessarily have an alert system that you can activate for an earthquake. That's a little bit more of a type of disaster that you can't quite prepare for. But even then, they are equipped with the resources in terms of human resources to send out psychologists and people who needed to be sent out immediately to help people cope with the fact that, they were afraid to go back into their homes after the earthquake happened. And because Cuba, having been under a blockade for over 60 years, a lot of the infrastructure is old and needs repairs. And so these are realistic problems that they have to face, but they're still trying to hold and accompany their people through these struggles. And I think that was very evident for us while we were there. We saw them, really focused on cleaning up after the hurricane because Havana was hit by Hurricane Rafael, and the electrical system was da- damaged to a large extent. But they were, out there on the roads in the neighborhoods cleaning up every day. The power lines were being replaced. The electrical workers really hard at work in all those days up till now, because this is a process that involves a lot, but involves a lot of innovation and creativity on their part, because they don't have the luxury of having all the resources that they need to fix these problems, right? And so they're doing overtime in order to now set up a sort of rotational blackout system that has been in place for months on the island, even before the grid collapsed. They've been doing rolling blackouts in order to manage electricity distribution for everyone. And it's hard. It's hard for people who already have to struggle to, make sure that their fridges are stocked, to have to go through these problems of not having enough electricity to keep things refrigerated, not having the luxury of extra money to go buy on a daily basis what you could preserve for a longer time if you had other means, right? I visited one of my professors from Elam who couldn't make it out to the conference, and she lives in Artemisa in Guanajay, the city of Guanajay, and she had been without power for 13 days at that point. She has two little kids, and I found her trying to encourage me and make me feel better about the situation while I was lamenting for her. And she showed me, the sort of makeshift charcoal stove that her husband had helped set up for them to be able to boil water and cook things while they didn't have electricity, to be able to heat water for showers and things like that. But the water wasn't running, so they're using, water that's stored in their tanks. But even that is going to run out at some point, right? So there was a palpable need for resources to be spread out for everybody to reach, to meet their needs. But at the same time, there wasn't this there wasn't you couldn't feel anger in the people. That's not something I felt at all. Talking to the folks, they were just trying to figure out how to help each other. People were going to neighbors who had generators to their houses to go charge up their phones or their power banks or whatever they needed in order to take it back home and utilize it for a few hours. Some collective, responsibility was very evident, and that's something that is not new to Cubans. I would say that in the U.S. and other parts of the world, we also respond in times of crisis. We join together, but it's very short lived. But this is Cuba, in a different way, has had to sustain this kind of mutual aid, mutual responsibility for each other for a longer time. And so it is a reflex for them that comes very easily.
A collective struggle that they are used to engaging in, so that when there's a situation in the community, okay, I'm making this stove and we're all going to use this stove. I've got this tank of water. We'll share it the way we can. Samira, you talked about some things like lack of resources and failing infrastructure. I think our listening audience is tired of me giving the explanation, so I'm going to send it over to you. Why is there a lack of resources in Cuba? Why can't people just in Cuba just walk over to Best Buy and buy the generator that they need? And why can't they just go to the supermarket and choose of the thousands of different brands of everything? Why? Why doesn't that exist in Cuba?
Yes. Why doesn't that exist in Cuba? Yeah, those were the questions we asked when we first got to the island. We were like, what is happening in this island? What is this stuff called sanctions? What is happening? What is this blockade that everybody keeps talking about? Hmm? Huh. That is the the main reason why Cuba doesn't have access to certain things that are readily available for other people. Um, what people don't realize is this blockade policy that the United States has enacted for over 6 decades has intentionally tried to strangle and just put a bolt in every possible avenue that Cuba could uh, make make it on their own commercially, financially speaking. It has not only has strict rules on direct trade with Cuba from the U.S., but it also has implications on other countries and other third party companies doing business with the U.S. because based on these laws, which are a different set of laws. Every few decades, you would see something new pop up in Congress that was related to clamping down on Cuba. And most people don't know about this having happened slowly but surely over the decades and having serious implications on how the government can function. Cuba being a socialist state is in it's thoroughly focused on being able to provide for its people as the main protector of the people, right? As a socialist state, it has the guarantee of providing housing, providing education, providing healthcare, providing even food on a basic level for its citizens, right? But in order for that to happen, Cuba and its government would have to be able to purchase a lot of things, would have to be able to access a lot of things. And right now, as we're talking about fuel and the power shortage, it's no it's no mistake that if a country lacks the fuel it needs, its industry is going to shut down, right? It's factories that are not going to be able to operate as much as they need to. Transportation is going to be difficult. Everything moves with fuel. Even the tractors that are needed to plow the fields and farm with need fuel. There are so many things that are fuel based, unfortunately, but that's the reality of the world we live in. And that is something that has been intentionally obstructed by the US government for a long time. Now, at some point, Cuba always had friends that some of whom had oil and fuel, like Venezuela. And for a long time, that was a friendship that provided quite a bit of stability for Cuba to be able to move forward with things. Not just in a question of, fuel that powers the country, but in other resources too that were available to their friends in the world. But with even that example, we see how the blockade goes after friends of Cuba in order to stop whatever can help Cuba move forward. Venezuela is going through a period right now of its own blockade and sanctions. And it's no secret that it's because Venezuela chose to also follow the Cuban socialist example, right? So then you start to think, okay, so what about these other countries that could help Cuba? What we all fail to understand is that the international monetary system is based on the US dollar. And the US government determining who can trade with Cuba and who can use dollars, how Cuba can use dollars in the world is a huge, huge problem to the extent where creditors are basically limited in their ability to lend Cuba money. Transactions are impossible for Cuba because they don't have the access to the international systems of lending and borrowing that other countries may. And so they have to buy a lot of things with hard cash. Now, how is a country, a small island that is mainly dependent on tourism, agriculture, and all these other typical island-like activity to sustain its economy, how is Cuba supposed to raise enough funds in order to circumvent some of these roadblocks? It's going to be very hard. very, very hard. And in the time that Cuba has tried to uh, supplement this kind of economy with other things that they're very good at, like their biotechnology sector has been developed and advanced to the point where they can create their own medicines, vaccines for a lot of things, produce things that would help not just themselves but a lot of people in the world. But again, there are roadblocks to that sector even thriving because a lot of the raw materials, a lot of the equipment and the technology that's required to push that sector forward are US based entities, rely on US based entities. Um, the patents, this whole intellectualization property phenomenon that has happened in the last century, it's on purpose. The system is making it so that that kind of power of creating and sharing information is only in the hands of a few. Whereas Cuba has been on the opposite end of that, trying to create things that could easily be replicated in different places so that there is a global self-sufficient system, that we don't need to only depend on one company for maybe aspirin because there's a monopoly or something, or we don't need to depend on one company for hospital equipment like MRI machines or CT scanners. Those kind of things we don't realize all a have been deeply entrenched in the U.S. business system, and that the blockade prohibits Cuba from accessing elements that even have as much as 10% of a U.S. product. So all these different ways are entangling the way that Cuba could really be self-sufficient and be the beacon that it can be without a blockade.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's very true. It's good to hear it from other folks. I think it's no secret working on this podcast that every time I have someone on, we talk about this blockade and we talk about it from a very different perspective. And thank you very much. Just talking about the realities of what Cuba could be doing for the world from the medical perspective and how that is just blocked and kept from and let's keep talking about the facts. The facts of the matter is Hurricane Katrina happened in this country, one of the first countries to offer doctors medical aid, drugs, medicine. Cuba denied because of the blockade. We talking about that Cuba right now is in the cutting edge of vaccines against respiratory cancers being cut off, being not allowed to even be looked at there's U.S. doctors and U.S. health organizations throughout the United States that are saying we need to look, there's vaccines, there's medicines, there are ways of healing where we could look at, stopping things like lung cancer happening in this country. But because of the blockade, they're refusing to allow not only U.S. citizens and U.S. doctors from looking at that technology and studying and having an interchange, but they're keeping other countries from doing it as well, using economic sanctions and the U.S. bullying of, if you talk to Cuba and we find out, we're going after you. Mm-hmm. So, and what was one of the first countries that said, we have something of a working vaccine against COVID-19. We want to share the information. The United States said no. It was Cuba, right? Before there was a Pfizer, Moderna, and all these other things that popped up, there was something that was being worked on in Cuba, and it was blocked by the blockade, saying no, and don't share it anywhere else. If you do, we'll have a response to it. So I'm glad we're talking from the medical. I mean, the blockade isn't just economic and political. It's medical, it's cultural, it's artistic, it's spiritual. We're going to have some folks on soon talking about, the lack of religious exchange and spiritual exchange because of this blockade. But Samira, thank you for giving us this dimension and this perspective on it. Just a little bit of an Elam commercial. So if any young people or anyone of an Elam applicant age range is watching this podcast and is thinking, wait, maybe this is for me. I've been studying biology. I'm thinking of going to medical school. What do they do? How do they contact IFCO? What's the commercial about it, Samira?
Right on. So in order to apply to Elam the scholarship through IFCO Passage for Peace, you can visit the Passage for Peace website at www.ifco.org. news.org. And that's where you could find more information about the scholarship program. You can request an application. Some of the basic requirements that we look for are that people should be between the ages of 18 to 25, but we make exception for those who are over 25 as long as they're not over 30 years old. We know we believe in everybody living out their dreams, but we have to have a cutoff, and 30 is it. And then you should be a U.S. citizen. Unfortunately, don't have the means of accepting green card holders. So once you get your U.S. citizenship, you can apply and also have completed 1 full year of general biology, general chemistry, organic chemistry, and physics at a college level. So way I did that was at community colleges because I wasn't a straight science major. So you can do that if you need to. But if you already have those credits, awesome. And have a love for your community, have a passion for giving back. That's what the school trains us to be, people who will give back to our communities, who will stand with our people and be the sort of healers that we need. We don't need to be replica of a system that we didn't study in or that we studied in and saw didn't really help us too much, right? So we need folks that are social justice warriors, people who are willing to sacrifice. Because I want to emphasize the fact that Cuba has been a country that has sacrificed a lot, not for only its people, but for the world. And they have taken a lot of that sacrifice and that the knowledge that they gained from being out in the world with medical missions in over 165 countries, in literally all these 65 years of their revolution. All of those people, one way or another, fed back into the resources and the knowledge we learned from as students at Elam, because a lot of our professors were people who had completed missions in various countries. And so that cycle of feeding back information and knowledge continues. And so it is our job as people who are out here, some of us who have graduated from the school, and anyone who wants to put out the word to the youth, is that remember, giving back is not a weakness, it is a strength. And that is what we learned from Cuba. Cuba gave, continues to give, because it is its strength as a nation. And those of us who want to train at Elam should have that willingness to serve and to give back.
Familia, Samir was talking about missions to 165 countries around the world. If you remember, a month ago, I did 2 shows in October talking about the UN vote, and 187 countries of the United Nations voted against the blockade in Cuba. There was one abstention, the country Moldova. The Moldovians will explain that for themselves. And there were 2 against, Israel and the United States. 165 countries, Cuban doctors and people who've been trained under the Elam. So it's not only Cuban doctors, but people who were trained by Cuban doctors became international citizens and were going around the world, going to places where they needed healers and not necessarily Western doctors. So again, folks, if you're watching this and you're between 18 and 30 and you're thinking, God, I wanted to listen to this podcast because I've heard so much about this Elam and I'm thinking about medical school, you go to IFCO Pastors for Peace. The website is ifconews.org. And you start looking at that application process and you see, and you'll get to spend an extra year in Cuba learning Spanish. All right. Come on. That's not too bad. That's wonderful. So folks, first and foremost, thank you so much, Samira. Thank you for being with us, thank you for having been recently in Cuba and bringing back the reality to us. It's always important to hear. And I'm always telling people, you can see Cuba for yourself. I'm always going to do this commercial, folks. Those of you listening, you're like, oh, Ben is doing the commercial again. If you want to go to Cuba, there's the caravan that goes with IFCO Pastors for Peace, where you run into Samira and you can talk to her about going to Elam and being a doctor. You can join the Venceremos Brigade, the Mayday Brigade. There's a ton of brigades out there for you to go see Cuba for yourself. This guy's been to Cuba. She's lived in Cuba and worked in Cuba, but you need to see Cuba for yourself. So I'm always going to do that commercial. Again, Samira, thank you so much for being with us today. All right, mi familia, I'm going to end with the typical YouTube commercial. If you loved this podcast, like it, share it, subscribe to the channel. You'll get a notification once or twice a month whenever I post. I want to thank Samira for being with us. ISCO will always have a space on this show. We're going to get Gail Walker, the executive director, on very soon to talk a little bit more about Cuba policy. There's a lot going on. We have folks we all know who now is in the White House, and we're all planning on what's going to happen. We're all planning, plotting, and finding out how we're going to survive the next 4 years of a blockade and repression against Cuba solidarity activists, which is something that is always happening in the United States, but also how these next 4 years are going to affect Cuba. So, folks, thank you for joining us. Like, share, subscribe. Dr. Samira Adre, thank you so much for being with us. Familia, como siempre, que viva Cuba libre. Que viva Cuba libre y socialista, and Cuba sí bloqueo no. Thank you.
Viva Cuba.